Welcome back to the course assessment workshop presented by Cumberland University's University Assessment Committee. This is part 2 of 3. If you didn't get a chance to watch part 1, go back and check it out. We talked about the essentially, who's responsible for course assessment, why we do it. We really focused on our weigh the pig, feed the pig, weigh the pig kind of a mentality as far as looking at, the whole purpose of course assessment is our teaching practices yielding effective returns in student learning. In this video, since we've already kind of covered the why, we're going to take a look at kind of the what. Well, what is CADS? And we're also going to take a look at writing effective learning outcomes. In this case, CADS, this is the reporting system that Cumberland University uses, and CADS stands for Course Assessment Document Sheet. Again, it's our reporting system that right here we've got 5 columns, and what we're looking at is we need to write at least 3. So this is, even though this says 3 to 5, the new updated CADS is going to say a minimum of 3. So we need to write at least 3 student learning outcomes for any one course. And when we write those outcomes, we need to have some sort of a measurement tool. How are we going to effectively measure and evaluate, did students learn in that course? Third, we need to have some sort of a target or a standard of comparison. So what is our target level or our benchmark for learning? Fourth, we need to interpret those results. So we need to tap into our quantitative and potentially some qualitative analyses, but primarily our quantitative analyses of, how many students are meeting that benchmark? What percent is meeting that benchmark? What's the spread of scores on meeting that benchmark? Those sorts of things. And then finally, we need to wrap up with some sort of an action plan. We need to complete that loop. So we need to talk about and interpret what those results mean. So diving right into our student learning outcomes, as far as writing quality outcomes, if you've ever studied the goal setting process, goal setting 101 talks about goals for moving forward and creating behavioral change should be follow the SMART principle. They should be specific, measurable, aggressive, or attainable, results-oriented, and time-based. This applies to writing good quality objectives and outcomes for a course as well. So let's take a look at what we mean here. Those targets, those outcomes for a course should be specific. What specifically do you want students to learn? We'll look at an example here in just a moment. But when we target what we want students to learn, we need to be able to identify how are we going to measure that in the course. And what you saw in the course assessment document, there was a column for the objective, and then the next column was for how we're going to measure that. But that's in our course assessment document. Particularly, you're probably writing as faculty, you're writing objectives and outcomes in a course syllabus. Students need to be able to see what is the outcome, what are they going to learn in this course, and how are they going to be measured. So being able to write an outcome in a way that not only targets what specifically should the student be able to demonstrate by the end of the semester, but how are they going to be evaluated. Like I said, we'll look at that here in just a moment. So that's the measurable component. We want our outcomes to be both aggressive yet attainable. So we want them to be aggressive, but we don't want that bar set so high that students don't have the opportunity to achieve it. If the bar is set too low, then we don't discriminate against students that are actually excelling in the class versus struggling if that bar is set too low. Results need to be, those targets need to be results oriented. Those objectives also need to be time-based. So when during the semester, when during the course is that student going to need to be able to demonstrate that learning outcome? A couple other key points for writing our objectives and our outcomes for a course. This should be future oriented, written in the future tense. So we don't want to say that students learned, students demonstrated in this course. No, the student will learn, the student will demonstrate, the student will be able to apply. over the course of the semester. And then they also need to use good quality action verbs. So a few examples of this. So let's say that this learning outcome was taken from one of our education courses. And so through the process of evaluating the outcome, we started out with students completing the undergraduate program in education will have knowledge of education principles. So in this case, if we were to say, does this meet that the SMART principle? Is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it action-oriented? Is it attainable? Well, we might say that this first one, it's not written in a very specific way. In other words, what do we mean by education principles? In this sense, that objective, that target isn't very well described. As well, it's kind of written in passive voice. We want to be able to say, the student will complete. Well, what is the student going to complete? How are they going to be evaluated? How are they going to be measured? The second part here, this is certainly written I know quite a bit better. The word choice for action verbs is still a little suspect in the sense that, what do we mean by competent? But in this sense, the instructor, whoever wrote this learning outcome, did a much better job of teasing out these educational principles when they say principles of classroom management, instructional techniques, and learning styles following introduction to a given classroom situation. So here they're even starting to tease out what we mean and when is the student going to be evaluated. Well, they're going to be evaluated in a classroom situation. We can make this even more effective in how it's written. Students will be able to apply and demonstrate. So again, a little suspect when we said the action verb of being competent, hard to really evaluate what we mean by competency. Students can apply and they can actually demonstrate in a given classroom situation. And what does the teacher want to see? They want to see the student be able to demonstrate principles of classroom management, instructional technique, and learning styles. So we would say, even though we could probably, somebody in the education field, in the education program, might even be able to write this even better as far as a learning outcome. But I think we can see here, we're kind of getting to the point, we can see the progression here of moving from a student learning outcome that is fairly poor, isn't very clear, isn't very specific, it's not measurable, and at least making that attempt to refine that process. And this is where we really need our program heads, our full-time faculty, and our adjuncts to collaboratively work together from the beginning of the semester, review those course syllabi, which is exactly what we did when we did this with some of our full-time faculty in an on-campus workshop. We had the faculty during an interactive activity sit down and work with one another, and they picked out course objectives. They picked out some of those learning outcomes and actually asked one another, teased out, is that learning outcome specific? Is it measurable? Is it using future tense and action verbs? So the kind of call to action here is we really need full-time faculty and adjuncts to work together from the beginning of the semester. Adjuncts, look at your course syllabi. Read through those course objectives or outcomes and ask yourself, are these written in specific and measurable ways? Are the action verbs lending themselves to measurable outcomes? Is it written in the future tense? If not, go back to the full-time faculty, go back to the program head and call attention to it. Sit down in a program meeting and start teasing out and rewrite those learning outcomes. Make them more effective. So let's look at an example of this. I pulled a couple of, a student learning outcome from one of my courses. Again, since this is going to be on recording from most faculty, we don't get to sit down and do this as a true workshop format, but let's kind of tease this out, what this might have looked like as a lot of our full-time faculty were doing this in an actual in-person workshop. So maybe we started out with this learning outcome for a particular course, which states, explore contemporary psychosocial theory regarding how to influence participation in sport and physical activity. So maybe at the beginning when we read through this, we've identified some key content, psychosocial theories pertaining to sport and physical activity. But then we might critique this and say, well, it's not very specific. What do we mean by explore, and how are we going to measure that? As well, it's written in passive voice. We're not really saying that the student is going to be able to demonstrate anything. So quite a bit of critique here. We can really kind of clean this SLO up. And maybe through that process of going back and forth between a couple of different faculty, we come up with this SLO. Again, not saying that it's perfect, but let's see the progression here. So as part of a course project, so we're identifying the measure. The student will summarize contemporary psychosocial theory regarding behavioral change and apply behavior change techniques during consultation sessions. So here we can see that their course project is going to be made up of the ability to summarize theory and then as well carry out live consultation sessions. So quite a bit more detail here to this particular outcome. And think, if you were a student taking a course, this SLO, this student learning outcome is far more descriptive and conveys so much more information as far as what the student is actually going to be able to do by the time that they're done with the semester. They're going to be able to summarize. They're going to be able to carry out a live consultation session. So I think we would say that this SLO, even though maybe not perfect, we could still add to it. We could still refine it. It is specific. It is measurable. It does contain an action verb that links to a measurable outcome, and it's written in the future tense. Let's take a look at, since, moving on from discussing the process of writing effective outcomes, let's talk about the actual measurement process. So let's say that we've identified the outcome. Now we want to take a look at how do we want to measure that outcome. Oftentimes we want to use multiple measures. We don't want to just identify one single measure for all of our learning outcomes. We want to use a variety of measures. So in other words, for any, if we're looking at a course and we have some sort of a standardized exam, let's say that that's in our business program, for example, and all the undergraduate students take a standardized exam that students from across the nation take, we wouldn't use that one standardized exam to assess every learning outcome in the course. We want a variety of measurement methods. And we want to link that method to the specific learning outcome. We want to make sure that it's both feasible and manageable to implement that measurement tool. So let's look at some practical examples of kind of best practices, if you will, for being able to do this. Right away, some poor measurement methods that we might say, final course grades. In the world of course assessment and program assessment, we really want to shy away from final course grades, because think for a moment, what all goes into a final course grade? Well, it's a lot more than just any one or a group of learning outcomes. It's a variety of competencies. Not only specific competencies where the student has to demonstrate skill, but demonstrate that they have knowledge of particular content. But oftentimes as well, grades are made up of participation and attendance points, which starts calling into idea effort that students put into a course. So final course grades are really made up of a lot of different variables. And when we talk about student learning outcomes, we want to pull specific measures that specifically measure one particular outcome. And I think the same could be said for overall grades on a single exam or a test. So looking at, okay, well, why wouldn't we want to use a final grade on the cumulative final at the end of the semester? Well, again, that cumulative final is probably measuring multiple subsets of competencies or multiple subsets of learning outcomes. Now, if we had a unit exam, and let's just say that unit exam, every question, let's say we have a 50-question unit exam, and all 50 questions tie back into one specific learning outcome, then we could use the final grade on that unit exam. But if half of that unit exam, only 25 questions, specifically target one learning outcome, well, then simply as that faculty member, go into the unit exam, pull that subset of questions out, analyze that data, and report back to that particular student learning outcome. And then finally, as a best practice for poor measurement, we really want to shy away from relying heavily on indirect measures. So a good example of an indirect measure might be an end of a course evaluation, where a student rates, let's just say on a scale from 1 to 7, that Likert type scale, how much did you learn in this course? That's an indirect measure. It's a student's perception or interpretation of what she thinks she learned in that course. So we really wouldn't want to use that. That being said, we want to rely more so on direct measures, and then maybe supplement with some indirect measures. It's not that indirect measures are in of themselves poor measures, just we want to rely more heavily on direct measures. So some of those good measurement methods, tying specific parts of an exam to a particular SLO, targeting key assignments to a particular SLO. So maybe it's a course project, or a speech that a student has to give, an oral presentation of some sort, but targeting an assignment to an SLO. Maybe when we're evaluating a particular SLO for an assignment, we have an agreed upon rubric. And especially with developing rubrics, if you want to take those rubrics to that next level, instead of just having the faculty member develop the rubric, get feedback as a faculty member, get feedback from your peers, get feedback from other adjuncts, get feedback from other full-time faculty, go into department program meetings. For example, I know here at Cumberland, our business program, they have an agreed upon rubric for all oral presentations. The faculty have all had input. They've all agreed to use the same rubric throughout the undergraduate curriculum, and it works for them. I think that's a very valid and reliable way to use rubrics. As well, using standardized exams, national exams, licensure exams, to establish benchmarks and compare students in a particular course in a very valid way to students outside of the course that can really yield some high quality data there. So a lot of times, faculty will say, well, okay, so I can't use final course grades. I can't use an entire exam unless it ties to one specific learning outcome. So how do I establish and define good targets? Once you've identified what that measure is going to be, we need to identify targets. So I really like this slide here because it kind of combines both of that, addresses both of those questions. What are some good measures, but as well, what are some good targets? So for example, maybe we write this, and we're going to use a common course rubric on this first example. And we say that 70% of students in the course will achieve at least 75% on this assignment based on the common course rubric. And that key term, common course rubric, identifies to the reader that this isn't just a rubric that one faculty member in one section came up with, that all the sections of the course are using this same rubric. So very good job to the faculty member that wrote that SLO. And establish that target. Class average for test questions related to this SLO will be 75% or higher. So again, very nice job for this group of faculty members that decided on this target and this measurement, that they were going to pull a subset of questions out of the exam and then analyze that data in relation to the SLO. Very, very nice job. It doesn't have to be a measure for one particular exam. This third example, kind of relates back to our weigh the pig, feed the pig, weigh the pig sort of an approach, demonstrating growth of understanding or growth of knowledge over the course. So for example, 80% of students will show improvement from the pre-test to the post-test. So on the post-test over the pre-test scores. 80% will demonstrate improvement. That can be in a very effective way for assessing from the beginning of the course and then determining the efficacy of teaching methods, assignments, what went into the course, and did students learn by the end of the course. Very good job there. Next, 70% of students will successfully complete at least 7 out of 10 skill checkoffs on the Unit 1 lab exam. So very nice job here. A lot of our programs at Cumberland University, it's not just content that the students need to know, they need to be able to demonstrate skills. So maybe you're teaching in a program, a couple of programs that come to mind here at Cumberland, our nursing program, our athletic training program. A lot of these programs lend themselves well to students need to demonstrate specific skills. And so maybe it's not a certain percentage of questions that they need to get right on an exam, but maybe it's a skills-based exam. And in this case, they have to demonstrate in order to demonstrate satisfactory completion, maybe it's 7 out of 10, I don't know, maybe it's 6 out of 10. You as the program faculty and adjuncts need to determine what that benchmark is. And then as well, I've used this last one with my graduate students on their projects, their capstone projects at the end of this semester. So instead of it being a grade, it's they have to demonstrate mastery of the writing process. So 80% of graduate candidates will be able to complete the literature review in 1 to 2 drafts identified by achieving at least satisfactory rating on the rubric categories, on all the rubric categories. So in this case, it's not about a certain percentage, it's how, as far as a grade, they don't get a grade on this, they just have to successfully complete it. And so most of them should be able to complete that in 1 to 2 drafts, whereas 20% of the class, it might take them 3 to 4 drafts. So again, this slide just essentially demonstrates that there are multiple ways to establish measures and to establish targets. And that's where good discussion amongst the faculty that is actually teaching the course and whoever is in charge of that program or in charge of analyzing data for that course. I know that I mentioned our English comp. Maybe there's 21 sections. Well, the program head might have identified one full-time faculty member to be in charge of compiling the aggregate data for English Comp 1. And so all of our adjuncts and full-time faculty that teach English Comp 1 work with that full-time faculty member to then compile and tease out what is the data telling us. So in this case, we need to define our good targets. We need to have measures for those. A lot of really effective ways to do that. What we'll do, let's go ahead and pause there. We will get ready and wrap up in part 3 with talking about reporting the data and completing the loop. So in this particular video, what we were able to accomplish, what we weren't able to in the first video, is we started teasing out what are good measures. I can't really tell you definitively what a good target is. What you're going to have to do as a faculty member is establish what you think might be good targets and then evaluate over the course of the semester. Maybe we set our benchmark way too high. Maybe, for example, in this first one, we said, the first time that we wrote this target, that we say 90% of students in the course will achieve 75% on the assignment based on the Common Course rubric. Well, maybe we just set the benchmark too high. What we've got to be able to do is throughout the process, determine what are good targets, what are good measures. So hopefully over the course of this video, we started touching upon that. As mentioned, what we'll do in part 3 of this video is we'll really kind of dive into the reporting process, how we interpret results, how we present results, and then what we need to do in order to complete that feedback loop. See you in the next video.